So we'll just jump right in here. Some general facts when we're looking at growing herbs. So we want to look at just some of the general facts, some things that growing conditions that herbs need. And we look at where we are going to locate them. We have to look also at the sunlight that is required for growing, much like vegetable gardens or any fruit production plants, and also the soil quality. So you want to start in your herb growing area with a nice, rich, loamy soil. And you also want to run a soil test. I know we extension agents, we preach running soil tests all the time. I can't stress enough how much running a soil test will save money and also help you with better production. So if you have a pretty bad soil, some spots here I know in our county, we have a lot of clay. We have to amend our soil with usually compost material. So you go in and you just kind of work that in. Most of you all do that on an annual basis if you're planting a vegetable garden, but you want to add some compost in there. If it's you may have to add some amendments to help with drainage, but usually the compost, if you get a good quality compost mixed in there, that will help. Herbs do like a very well drained soil. They are a lot of them are prone to root rot, so you want to make sure that you do choose an area that drains well and it doesn't have a problem with standing water. Selecting your planting area, again, the light requirement, you want to make sure your herbs have at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. There are a few herbs that will tolerate some partial shade. A couple of those examples are chamomile and chives, and FYI, the herb of the year this year is chamomile. And believe it or not, there's lots of things you can do with chamomile besides make tea. And then growing herbs that you are going to use. Just make sure that it's stuff that you know you're going to use or that somebody in your family is going to use. And then be sure that you do your research and you know the growth habits. The number one thing is, and if you've never grown mint, then you don't know this, but it is very invasive and it will take over. And lemon balm can be a little bit invasive. So make sure you do your research on your herbs. So continuing on with planting, you can start with seeds or you can buy your seedlings or transplants at local garden centers or greenhouses. If you buy transplants, I want to make sure that you are aware that I always recommend that you pull those plants out of the pots and look at those roots to make sure they aren't already starting to turn a brown color. They're not too wet. They're not, starting to have a little bit of root rot going on. You want to make sure not only that your plant is healthy on the above the soil, but below the soil. And then consider growing different herbs together that will actually benefit each other instead of those that will compete with each other as far as for nutrient or uh, moisture requirements, but also for space. That's a big one. Again, I go back to mint because if you plant mint in your herb bed, everything else, it's going to compete and you're going to have issues. Watering and fertilizing. You want to make sure that you are watering your herbs slowly, um, so that the water is absorbed slowly and deeply, and that will allow for that more water to be absorbed into the root zone area and not run off. And then allow your soil to dry out slightly in between your waterings. Now, of course, if you've got them in a natural bed or in a garden, you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. But if you get into the growing season and it's dry and you're having to water, just remember that. Or if you have them in containers or raised beds. You want to make sure you avoid that overwatering because again, root rot will set up and you will have a huge issue with root rot. And some herbs are pretty sensitive to that. Herbs usually don't require heavy fertilization, but a light application of a liquid fertilizer can be beneficial. Things such as Peters, Miracle Grow, any of those, using those in hose-in sprayers work quite well. Or if you have sucker hoses and you have an injector or something. If you don't want to use the commercial type or the chemical type, you can use fish emulsion, which works quite well. Just a note, I use a lot of coffee grounds sometimes when I am growing herbs, especially in containers. Coffee grounds have a low nitrogen, but they're a really good source of organic material also, as well as a small source of nitrogen, so it doesn't, overwhelm the plant. Um, Maintenance. You will need to regularly prune and deadhead your plants so that they will produce more. They'll become bushier, and you don't want to let them go to seed unless you are raising that herb for seed. So, and the one good example I have of that is cilantro. So we raise cilantro for the leaf, and we want to use that foliage for our dishes and things like that. But once you've harvested and you know it's getting close to the end of the growing period for your cilantro, you may want to go ahead and let it go to seed because the seed on the cilantro is coriander. So you may want to eventually let some of them go to seed for other purposes. Mulching around the base of your herb plants will help with, of course, weed suppression, and it also helps with retaining that moisture, so you shouldn't have to water as much. You can use a lot of different materials for mulch. You can use regular shredded hardwood mulch. You can use straw, shredded newspaper, just different materials like that. Just make sure that what you use is not going to be harmful to the soil or to the plant. When you go to harvest your herbs, you want to harvest when they are not in bloom. If you are harvesting for the leaf, um, this actually allows or encourages more leaf growth when you harvest when they are not in bloom. They'll keep producing more leaf growth and they get bushier. If you are harvesting for the bloom, you want to harvest when the flower buds first appear, but before they are open. And that is when that oil concentration, those essential oils, that is when they are the most intense for if you're growing for scent or for flavor. And if you are harvesting blooms for craft projects, such as the lavender and some of the other herbs, you should pick those just before they are fully opened up. The blooms are fully opened up. So a general rule of thumb is it's best to harvest in the morning after the dew has dried off the leaves, but before the heat of the day starts. If you harvest early in the morning, and after that dew has dried off, your essential oils are at their highest at that time. If you wait till getting into the heat of the day, the essential oils will evaporate some and the flavor and the scent will decrease. So the best time is in the morning time after that dew is dried off. When you're harvesting, you should take no more than 1/3 of the entire plant at one harvesting. This allows for the plant to continue to thrive and to regrow so that you can have more harvest off of that one plant. And you want to try to leave some of the blooms, if you can, to attract pollinators. If you are harvesting for the leaf, I've just told you, I've contradicted myself because I told you to harvest before they bloom, and now I'm telling you to leave some of the blooms for pollinators. So what you could do is have one section of the plant that maybe you harvest a few flowers off of to keep it from really going to seed a lot, but you let it bloom out a little for the pollinators, and then the other parts of the plant you keep the blooms pruned off so that you have good harvest of the leaves. However you want to do it, but there's a lot of pollinators that herbs attract that you would really want to leave a few of those blooms. And then herbs in containers. This has really become popular. I do a lot. I used to do a lot of classes. I have kind of slowed down some on these, but I always get requests for doing a class on growing herbs in containers. Lots of different reasons why people grow in containers. One could be that they do have poor soil, they don't want to fool with trying to amend the soil, or they have a critter control problem. I know a lot of us have deer problems, which deer don't eat a lot of the herbs, but I will tell you, if they are hungry enough, they will eat anything. So there's just a lot of different reasons why someone may choose to grow herbs in containers. You can put more than one herb in the same container. I do a lot of classes on themed pots. Basically, I do a spaghetti pot or pizza pot. I do a salsa pot. The spaghetti pot is nothing more than planting the oregano, the thyme, the basil, and maybe some, you know, green onions or peppers in with that, or even a tomato or Roman tomato in that pot. And then the salsa pot is you put cilantro and the Roma tomatoes and the green pepper plant and then some green onions in there in that pot, and you grow them together and you just go out and harvest. And this is great for people that live in apartments. They just have a little patio and it's just one person living in the home. They can harvest just enough to make a small bowl of sauce or salsa for themselves for their meal. Um, you can keep some of the quick spreaders, such as that mint. If you really like mint, you can grow those in containers and keep those from taking over. And again, you can grow them practically anywhere. Your pots, you can put them on patios. You can mix them into your landscape. Have decorative pots, and say you live in a residential area and gardens are frowned upon, you could actually grow some things in pots mixed into your actual landscape. But the biggest reason, of course, is that most herbs love to be grown in containers. A lot of them like to be in that confined space. So they do quite well in containers as long as you water them regularly and take care of them. So getting into some of the uses for herbs, of course, most of you all know that they're used medicinally, culinary, or they are used for, hang on a second, I'm trying to move okay, for aromatic purposes. They've been around, herb gardens have been around for over 4,000 years. These can be traced all the way back to, biblical times. So, ginger is one of our oldest known herbs. And we have found, and I found through reading about herbs and doing some research over the years for my Herb Day program, that they used to be used and still are to some degree for curing sick, fumigating buildings. You can perfume the body, or they were really big in using them in the process of embalming the dead before there was actual embalming practices. And now they are really popular in being grown actually in landscapes and then in gardens for culinary uses, dietary supplements, and lots and lots of different reasons. A craft as well. So when we look at actual herbs, there are herbs, and then you have spices, and then there are flavorings. And so I've broke that down and given you basically the definition. The herbs refers to that aromatic leafy part. Spices are the pungent seeds, roots, and bark. And then flavorings we refer to those, they are the commodities that are used the same way the herbs and spices are, but they are actually foods, such as coffee, chocolate, nuts, etc. So herbs that we use for the culinary purposes, this is what makes dishes very unique and signature for certain regional areas in different countries and even in different states of the U.S. So that's just the flavoring or the unique part of certain dishes that are created in different areas, and it's usually the herb or the spice that is in there that makes it that unique. We have another classification of a salad herb or a pot herb, and those include the watercress, the sorrel, the dandelion, arugula, chicory. Um, you use those most of the time. We see those in salads, but you can also use a lot of those in soups and stews. So they're not just for salads, they're for a lot of different other dishes as well. And a lot of people don't realize that. Using herbs culinary wise, this is one way you can add more color to your dishes and liven them up. This is really good to use early on with young children, getting them to eat certain dishes. If you add some herbs in there, make it more colorful. A lot of times that attracts children to that dish. A light colored soup, I've got an example. You can make it more appetizing just by putting a few flakes of parsley in there. It just, it looks very I used to tell my children, isn't this a sophisticated soup? I would put a little parsley on top. And, this is like what we get at a restaurant. This is mommy's restaurant. And they thought that was funny, but they would eat it. So it helped add to their dietary needs. They would eat things that normally I would have to beg them to eat. Another added bonus is the boost that they can actually give to the vitamins and minerals of our food, and also to our bodies. And then rosemary, purslane, and green tea, and a lot of people drink green tea. Those things are said to be rich in antioxidants, which also helps maintain vitality and slow your aging process. And my disclaimer is I am not a healthcare professional, okay? This is just from my research. Um, so when we cook with fresh herbs, you want to make sure that you are using the freshest ones possible. If you are growing your own herbs, then that is great. You know how fresh they are. You went out in the morning and you harvested them, and you know what that essential oil content is because you actually went out and harvested at the right time. If you do not grow herbs, but you are cooking and it does contain herbs in that dish, then locate and source the freshest that you can get your hands on, whether it be at a farmer's market, in the produce section of the grocery store, or if your neighbor grows herbs. Um, Making sure that you get the freshest is your best bet. This is a really good guide when you are substituting fresh herbs in a recipe. If you don't have, if you're using fresh herbs, you want to remember that 3 teaspoons, which is equal to 1 tablespoon of fresh herbs, that is equal to 1 teaspoon of dried crushed herbs. So if your recipe calls for 3 teaspoons of fresh herbs, but you don't have the fresh herbs, but you have that in a dried form, then you only want to use 1 teaspoon. And then 1 teaspoon of the dried herbs is equal to 1/4 a teaspoon of a powdered herb. So if your recipe is calling for a teaspoon of dried herbs, say dried rosemary, but all you have is powdered rosemary, then you would adjust your recipe to this. So just be sure that when you are cooking a culinary dish, that you want to make sure you do use the correct amount if you have to substitute fresh for dried or dried for fresh. When you are cooking, and this was something that I was very surprised when I was doing my research to find. I always put my herbs in, after I get the dish started cooking, I add the herbs, I go by the recipe, and I put them in, and then if it's a soup or a stew or a sauce, I let it simmer. Well, I was doing it wrong. So powdered herbs and spices, it's released immediately. So you actually, if you're using the powdered herbs and the spices, you want to wait until about 15 minutes before that dish is done, before you add them, so that that flavor is nice and strong there and not really dull. So if you're using whole spices, those should be added when you first put the dish on to cook, So they have time for their flavor to be fully extracted during the simmering. So whole spices, some examples would be I know I use coriander in some of my things. And so when I use the coriander seed, I could put that in at the beginning because it will take the whole cooking process for that flavor to actually be fully extracted. They can be used for salt substitutes. This is huge, and I know you all have probably heard about this before, but for those that suffer from health or heart issues, that have to decrease their salt, this is one way that you can actually use some of your herbs you're raising to decrease salt. I know Mrs. Dash, that's what a lot is in Mrs. Dash or some of those other salt substitutes. But if you use your herbs that you raise or that you harvest fresh, the flavor is way better and you don't miss the salt as much. So here are some examples of some salt substitutes for foods or beverages. If you like to drink tomato juice, I do, and I like to load it down with salt and a little bit of pepper. I have had to cut back on salt a lot. So I have learned to put a little bit of lemon or lime juice in mine. And sometimes I will throw in a little bit of oregano, believe it or not. And it does, it makes that tomato juice flavor just really, it's a really nice, to me, it's more intense. Um, I really like it. I'm not a big dill fan unless it's a dill pickle. So, but the using the oregano with the lemon is really nice in the tomato juice. Cottage cheese, you can try adding chives or sage. And then with eggs, I know a lot of people use dill in their eggs. Again, I'm not a big dill person, but I do like to put a little basil in my eggs and a little black pepper. So that's really nice. And then the end of my program, um, I have just an herb and spice guide, and you can see I've listed some of the most popular. I've got several slides here. And it just gives you what the flavor of the herb is, especially if you're new to herbs, um, or raising herbs and wanting to decide what you want to raise in your garden to use. So I have basil there, and you can see I list it as what the flavor is that it will add or that it has. And then some sample uses, some things that you could use it in. Of course, most people know about basil. My favorite way to use basil is I love a margarita pizza. So I like to have fresh basil on hand when I make my homemade margarita pizza. Bay leaves. I love to use bay leaves when I'm making a pot roast, or a spaghetti sauce. I do put a bay leaf in my spaghetti sauce. Chives, of course, those are a mild oniony. You can use it as an onion substitute. You can use it in a lot of different things. Probably the most common. A lot of people use chives on their baked potatoes, but if you like mashed potatoes, those are, you can use those in mashed potatoes as well. Cilantro, a lot of people I come in contact with do not like cilantro. To me, cilantro stinks, but I do like a little bit in my salsa, my fresh salsa. You can get too much really quick on cilantro, and it says it's a grassy scent with a citrusy, pungent flavor. Guys, I'm just going to tell you, to me, cilantro smells like a stink bug. A lot of people tell me that it smells like dish soap. So, but I do like it in my salsa, but it has to be in small amounts. Dill, it's very popular to use dill on salmon to make a nice dill sauce. I mainly only use dill in some, I have a really good recipe for a dip that has dill in it. And I like to use dill in my tuna fish salad. I use it sometimes if I'm out of pickles or if I'm trying to cut back on salt, so I don't use those dill pickles because they do have some salt in them. I will use just the dill and some mayonnaise, and it's really nice. And I have tried that in my chicken salad too, and it's not bad. Lavender. Lavender is not just for aromatic. You can actually eat lavender or use it in culinary. It's usually we find it mostly in dessert type dishes, ice creams, cakes, cookies, icings. Um, I have had a chocolate fudge with lavender that was just phenomenal. Chocolate and lavender really do go well together. Lemongrass, it has that nice lemony scent. People have used lemongrass in teas, but you can also use it in soups and stews. And then, and on a side note, I do another program on, or another little talk on using herbs also as insect and critter deterrents. Lemongrass is really good to grow in pots on your back porch. It will help repel mosquitoes. Mint. So mint is a really nice, refreshing herb. The number one thing that mint is used in usually is in the iced tea and then the lamb dishes, the mint sauce. There are a lot of different mints. There are apple mints, chocolate mints, pineapple mint. I mean, just there's lots of different mints. Um, and then there's just the regular spearmint and peppermint. But mints, again, I like to put those in with fruit salads or fruit dishes. But you have to be careful when you're growing those. And then oregano. Oregano is kind of a peppery flavor. Most people use oregano, of course, in their spaghetti sauces, Italian dishes, and things like that. Um, I like to use oregano in some of my pasta dishes, just pasta noodles, with a little bit of olive oil and some oregano and maybe some thyme and some cherry tomatoes. So it makes a great dish. Parsley has that grassy flavor. A lot of times parsley is just used as a garnish, but it can actually be used in dishes. It just has a nice uh, I call it a earthy fresh flavor, but it's really not earthy, it's more grassy. But it has and it's a real mild flavor, so it's not overwhelming. Rosemary, it has a very strong piney scent. Um, I love rosemary. I love to just grow rosemary and smell rosemary, but I love to use it in chicken dishes. They've got lamb here and potatoes and then the poultry. That's what I really like to use it in is when I'm fixing chicken breast or I use actually rosemary in my roast as well. I use a rosemary, thyme, and oregano with the coriander in my thyme and some savory, and it really makes a nice roast. It makes a nice flavor to your roast. Uh-oh. Sage, of course, most people are familiar with using sage in their Thanksgiving stuffing or dressing. And that is wonderful in your dressing. Sage can also be used with roasted chicken. I like to use some sage. I do put a little bit of sage in my roast as well. I throw a lot of different things in my roast, and it always comes out really flavorful and really nice. Um, but of course, you sage is really good with pork recipes. Uh, pork chops, pork roast, things like that. Tarragon, it has a strong tart-like flavor, and it can be like that black licorice flavor. So you have to be very sparingly a lot of times with the tarragon. Um, and of course, I've got it listed there, the roast and the chicken. You can also use that in omelets as well. And it's a really good addition to any fish uh, dishes or recipes. Thyme it's like that lemony, minty flavor. It's used a lot in, sauces and soups, uh, in the stuffings, and then also in different little casseroles. Um, you can add thyme. There's a lot of different things that I have added thyme to, just experimenting and trying to see, what kind of flavor it will bring out in certain dishes. And so far, I've not run across any that it's ruined. So, Okay, and then that's the end of my presentation.